Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
It's a bit of a relief, but we'll see what happens with the rain now.
The part of the airport where my planes are was absolutely fine.
People in the sea to sky region feel some relief after days of rain and flooding. But what's next?
I'm not ready for spring, but this seems like spring.
Plus,
that's a bad season. I mean, I haven't seen anything like this for decades.
All that rain and warmer temperatures mean no skiing or snowboarding on lower mainland mountains. And
the school kind of don't have support on how to get MSP. They said, just figure it out. There's Google.
we take a close look at the struggles of international students in BC as the province and Ottawa tighten the rules and numbers.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Hello, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. Days of heavy rain and snowmelt from record high temperatures have pushed rivers over their banks, causing flooding and evacuations. Pemberton remains in a local state of emergency, with parts of the village, though, now downgraded from evacuation orders to an alert. As our Premji shows us, residents and experts are watching forecasts very closely.
All along the sea-to-sky corridor, rushing water after rain pummeled the southeastern part of the province Tuesday into Wednesday. Rivers nearly level with the highway in some parts as you travel from Squamish up to Pemberton, and more wet weather on the horizon.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely a concern, even running along, here with the water, levels up to the village trail. I think it's definitely, a bit scary.
Traveling over to the village of Pemberton, just 30 minutes north of Whistler, where a local state of emergency remained in place from Tuesday afternoon. Residents who have seen their homes nearly flood say there's been some reprieve thanks to Mother Nature.
It's a bit of a relief, but we'll see what happens with the rain now.
As they brace themselves for another chain of atmospheric rivers.
Well, so much is out of your control, so yeah, you're just hoping for the best.
And preparing for the worst, sandbagging taking place where it's needed most, and go bags ready just in case, as receding rivers and creeks rise again, with Environment Canada calling for another 50 millimeters of rain in the Howe Sound region after 70 to 500 millimeters already fell since Friday.
What has been really unusual about this event, especially for the time of year, is the long duration and the consistency of the very wet conditions and very warm conditions. So the snowpack is of particular concern.
Farmers in the region echoing this concern.
I should not be looking at green grass on the fields right now. I don't want to think about field work or anything. I'm not ready for spring, but this seems like spring. It's totally early and way too warm.
Now, this chain of atmospheric rivers could be coming to an end by Thursday, but the River Forecast Center does say the next 24 to 48 hours are still very unpredictable. But what we do know is the rain and the snowmelt have been pounding the rivers throughout the sea-to-sky corridor, and this may not be the last heavy rainfall and big snowmelt of the season. So they're warning people to stay prepared throughout BC. Zara Premji, CBC News, Whistler.
That warm, wet weather is hitting South Coast ski and snowboard hills very hard. Many mountains closed for the day. As Janella Hamilton shows us, many people eager to hit the slopes are worried this season could be a washout.
Riyadh Abu Labin and Carol Shaban had hoped to go skiing on the North Shore, but instead, a backup plan.
That's a bad season. I mean, I haven't seen anything like this for decades.
Streams of water can be seen flowing across ski runs, and where snow once blanketed the ground, dirt and puddles. A very different story from just weeks ago. Yay! Abu Labin, who volunteers as a doctor at nearby Grouse Mountain, says this year's season has been horrific.
In the backcountry, it's really bad as well because the snowpack is completely saturated with water. It's pretty unsafe and there's not much coverage. So I don't know. I think for everybody that loves the outdoors and the mountains, it's kind of a year of just being cautious. It's a bummer year.
From Mount Washington on Vancouver Island to Cypress in West Vancouver, Many resorts forced to shut down their lifts until conditions improve. Here at Mount Seymour in North Vancouver, there has been no snowfall for the past 7 days, and the rain continues to melt away the little snowpack there is. According to the resort's website, the snow level at the base of the mountain is 6 times lower than this time last year.
A flick of the switch from extremely cold temperatures for this time of year to extremely warm temperatures. And now we're seeing that relatively shallow snowpack be vulnerable.
It's a tough year. It's a tough time for everybody in the ski industry, I think.
But experts say there is still time in the season for more snow.
Let's look at historic years and see some of those low snow years rebounded right away in February. Some rebounded in like late March and April.
And for those with passes they can't use, according to their websites, most ski hills do not issue refunds for weather-related closures unless people have paid for extra coverage. So for the hardy few braving the wet mountains, it's time to make the most of it, whatever Mother Nature brings. Janella Hamilton, CBC News, North Vancouver.
Time to bring in Darius Madavi for our first look at the weather and some mildly encouraging news.
Mildly encouraging. Yeah, that's how I'd put it. The last wave of this atmospheric river event is here, and as it passes, we're going to see temperatures finally start to come down from these record-breakingly warm temperatures. We hit over 17 degrees in Vancouver, over 18 degrees in Abbotsford yesterday, breaking the all-time January temperature records for those locations since the 1930s when those stations started operating. In terms of rain, we did get a little break Tuesday, yesterday, where we saw a little bit less activity, but that last wave of the atmospheric river is really hitting now, and although the mountains somewhat block some of this radar imagery, you can see it's still tracking into parts of the valley, and alpine areas around Squamish and Pemberton have gotten a decent amount of rain. But fortunately, that hasn't translated to those spiking water levels once again in the Lillooet River near Pemberton. We have seen water levels rise once again, at least start to show a little bit of a hint of some rising water levels, but there hasn't been a big spike, and they are remaining somewhat steady, it seems, albeit much higher than they were just a few days ago. So it doesn't look like we're going to get another one of those big spikes, fingers crossed, but we're going to keep an eye on that, as well as the Squamish River levels, because those were also looking like they might spike today as well. Then in terms of freezing level, we are starting to come down from our big peak, which I have left on here, but it is starting to look like we won't get quite this low, and we might see it rise once again. So we'll have a close look at temperatures later this hour.
Sounds good. Thanks, Darius.
Thank you.
Vancouver police are searching for witnesses after a car hit a 15-year-old outside a school.
She sustained some very serious life-altering injuries. She was immediately rushed to hospital by paramedics. This 15-year-old remains in hospital where she's still undergoing treatment for her injuries.
Police say a gray Mercedes struck the teen while they were crossing West 16th Avenue near Wallace Street around 2 p.m. Tuesday. If you saw anything or have dash cam video, you're asked to contact Vancouver Police. As we told you earlier in the week, helicopter pilot and skiing guide Lewis Ainsworth is the latest victim to be named in the helicopter crash north of Terrace last week. A friend says his loss will be felt across the mountaineering community.
He had so much untapped potential as the president of our association, but he was just an affable person to be with, good-natured and confident in his own ability and confident that he could look after people. And you know, he inspired trust, you know, as a companion in the mountains.
4 people were killed in the crash. 3 other passengers were injured and remain in stable condition. To politics now. BC Green Party leader Sonia Furstenau says she will be running in a different riding in the upcoming provincial election.
This decision marks not only a return to my roots, but also a significant milestone in the ongoing story of the BC Green Party.
Furstenau says she will run in NDP-held Victoria Beacon Hill after representing the Cowichan Valley since 2017. This October's election will be the first with new boundaries for the Cowichan Valley riding. Some of its eastern communities are now part of a new constituency. Victoria Beacon Hill is represented by BC Children and Family Development Minister Grace Lohr. She won the seat in 2020 with 54% of the vote. BC counts 175,000 international students studying at public and private colleges. Recently, though, that industry has been under the microscope. The post-secondary education minister found instances of what she calls poor quality education and a lack of instructors. Now the number of students will be dropping as Ottawa limits who can study in Canada. Our John Hernandez went out to learn more from people at the very heart of this story, the students.
Canada is capping the number of international students it's allowing to study here over the next 2 years. Politicians say students aren't being set up to succeed. In some cases, they say they're being taken advantage of by schools, running into housing challenges, unaffordability challenges, and having a tough time finding a job. These are stories we wanted to hear firsthand, so we were invited to an international student union to chat with recent arrivals about their experiences. When did you first decide to come to Canada?
So I decided to come to Canada in 2018, November. So that's when my semester actually started in the University of Fraser Valley.
What was the transition like? Was it challenging at times?
Yeah, 100%. I did get a culture shock initially. I was not adapting to the weather, the timeline, even like the language I was speaking. So for me, it was a culture shock at first.
I went to Alexander College. It's in Vancouver.
How did you sort of come to choose Alexander College?
So I was in such a young age. I just did my grade 12, which is schooling back in India. And then I decided to move to Canada for a better life. So yeah, that time it was like a lot of international students were coming, and then the Alexander College was the one who provided me with the offer letter.
When you first came to Canada, what was the transition like?
When I just came, and then I didn't even know anyone here. And then it was only in my college that I got to know a few of my friends who were also new, and then we were in first semester. We just decided randomly to, okay, let's like have a basement together, and that was the hardest part. Living with unknown people who you don't even know, and then you're sharing everything. You're sharing your personal room and space because you can't afford much money to have a private room.
Do you have a memory about a really hard moment for you when you were transitioning over here?
So I don't know what to expect in Canada. I have no contact when I arrived. I don't have contact to the school. I have to Google the school, and my phone was not working properly because my phone came from the Philippines.
Yeah.
Being on a bus, there's like multiple bus numbers, so I got lost through that. I was able to find my host family. I thought it was close by to the school, but my school was in downtown. That house is in Marine Drive, so it was quite far. And when I found out that the school kind of like don't have support on how to get MSP, they said just figure it out. There's Google. There's no support with how to get my SIN number and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which bank is beneficial for international students. I found those things out along the way. And the biggest challenge was finding a job.
I was struggling to find a job. Then I met one of my old friend who was already settled here. So he helped me in finding job. And then I also stayed with him in his basement for 2 years. So if I couldn't have that friend here, so my struggle gonna increase more. So that's why we started this organization that every student should have someone here who can take care of them. Being a founder, every month I received a lot of complaints by students that they are not getting work. And even now our hands are standing too because we cannot accommodate such number of students. We are trying our best, but still many students are sitting home getting no work because of rising unemployment. Plus they are also exploited by the private colleges. They are intentionally failing them to get more money, and that making students more depressed. So that's why I think if they could stay at their back home, that would be a much better place for them right now.
The BC government says there's about 175,000 international students here. More than half of them are enrolled in private colleges or universities. The student cap won't apply to existing students, and the province still isn't sure just how many permits it will be able to approve this year. Oftentimes, international students will arrive in Canada only to discover they've been scammed or exploited. So we're going to speak with an immigration consultant who's fighting on their behalf. You mentioned these schools can pop up anywhere. Can they pop up in this area right here?
100%, and you know what? There may be a few in this area. I know in this area there's so many private colleges that are the size of my office.
When you first heard news of that cap, what went through your mind?
Honestly, I don't know how many people will agree with this with me, but I was a little bit of relief because things are not in control right now. in order to get Canada under control. The students are already here. In order to take care of them properly, in order to make sure nothing will get streamlined 100%. Unfortunately, that's going to take years and years and years. For that, just to clean up the mess, sometimes you need to take a step back. Now, I think in the last week, in my email, I have about 8 to 10 colleges that are now selling. Private colleges that want to sell their practice now because they were dependent on these fees coming in and they really didn't have anything to offer.
There's also been a lot of political opposition to the international student cap. The federal NDP says it unfairly blames international students for contributing to Canada's housing crisis. We're going to speak with an MP who says the system has gone unchecked for too long, but penalizing students isn't the answer. In terms of international students and this sort of system of exploitation, how has it been able to kind of operate unchecked for so long?
Well, that's a good question, right? I mean, this is something that's happened for a long time, whether it be liberal governments or conservative governments. Successively, this has happened, and it's gone unchecked, and now it's sort of reached this sort of heightened level to the point that it has. The government needs to do a much better job to make sure that accountability is there and to ensure that protection is there for these international students. I've always said those students who are victims of fraud, they should not be penalized, and they've already suffered enough.
What message do you think this cap has maybe sent or said about international students as it relates to housing?
It is so easy for people just to point fingers and say it's the newcomer's fault. And so the reaction would be to put a cap on and to disallow for people to come to Canada. From my perspective, newcomers are not to blame. Canada wants to attract international students because we want new talents, young talents, to come to Canada to get educated. We hope that they would actually stay in Canada to support our economy, to support our industries. What we need is a partnership, collaboration between the federal government, provincial and territorial governments, and institutions. They need to actually ensure that student housing is being provided for, both for international students as well as domestic students.
Like it or not, changes are coming. Since Ottawa announced the cap, BC introduced its own suite of measures it says will strengthen international education. That includes more oversight of private schools and higher language requirements to study here. Will that improve the educational experience overall? We'll find out over the next 2 years.
John Hernandez reporting on changes affecting thousands of people in hundreds of public and private colleges. To the toxic drug crisis in BC now. A new coroner's report says Port Alberni has the third worst death rate in the province amid the ongoing public health emergency.
There's not one person that isn't in the room here that isn't impacted by this crisis. We've all lost or have somebody addicted right now.
With this in mind, the Séchot Nation has presented a community response strategy. It has 4 pillars: people, places, programs, and prevention. It also incorporates traditional cultural healing practices. Now, BC's drug decriminalization project kicked off exactly 1 year ago. The Minister of Mental Health and Addictions now says ending the 3-year project will not save, quote, a single life. But in an interview with CBC's Gloria Makarenko, the outgoing chief coroner says it cannot be judged after just 1 year.
So, where people say, well, decrim's a failure, we can't measure 1 year of decriminalization against decades of criminalization. That's where this problem started. And I don't think we can measure the success of decriminalization until we address the toxic supply, because people are still dying every day because the supply is toxic.
Lisa Lapointe will be retiring as chief coroner on February 18th after 13 years in the post. You can listen to her full interview tomorrow on the Early Edition. This week, a Vancouver man was arrested and charged with second-degree murder in the 2007 killing of a woman named Crystal Saunders. Her remains were found in Manitoba. But Kevin Charles Q has a criminal history in this province as well. In 2015, Q pleaded guilty to choking 2 women in BC in a pair of attacks that left both victims fearing for their lives. CBC's Jason Proctor joins us now with more. And a warning for you, this story does contain details of sexual assault. Jason, you've gone through the 2015 court documents. What more do we know about what Q pleaded guilty to?
Yeah, I have. We discovered these two charges, which have not previously been reported, and I put an application in for the audio from the hearing in 2015. He pleaded guilty to the aggravated sexual assault of one woman and the aggravated assault of another woman over a year apart, these two separate incidents. But I have to tell you, the details are horrific. Both women choked unconscious. Both women thought they were going to die in these two separate incidents. One was somebody that he then sexually assaulted violently over the course of about 4 or 5 hours. The other incident was somebody he had met on Tinder. They had been in sort of a dating relationship. He slapped her during intercourse. She slapped him back, and that lit off this change in personality, as the prosecutor described it, that left her absolutely terrified. And in fact, her 12-year-old daughter came to her rescue, basically overhearing him at that point saying there was something inside him that scared him, that had been unleashed.
So how did his criminal activities, criminal behavior in BC impact, if anything, the investigation into Crystal Saunders' killing?
Well, this is the interesting part of all this. It comes down to DNA. When RCMP in Manitoba announced these charges in relation to the 2007 murder, they talked about a 2014 case, I believe, where DNA tied him to that killing. Now, these events all happened here in BC. They were also DNA determinant in that DNA linked him to these incidents, and ultimately he was forced to give his DNA over as a result of this conviction, this pleading guilty. And so it kind of all comes back to these incidents here. This is informed speculation, but that ultimately have resulted in this cold case murder. And as we know, the RCMP are also looking for information as to whether he may have any involvement, any other unsolved incidents in other parts of the country, because he traveled back and forth between Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and British Columbia.
Jason Proctor, thanks very much. And you can read more on your story on our website, cbc.ca/BC. Thanks again.
Thank you.
BC Ferries is taking steps to ensure all its vessels sail successfully this summer. That includes tightening the annual retrofit schedule. BC Ferries doesn't do annual maintenance during the peak summer season, but this year it's compressing that schedule even more to make sure unplanned delays don't disrupt the peak travel time.
That compression puts extra pressure on our system in terms of maintenance, but provides better service and better reliability for the customer.
Ferries will also be replacing a problematic part in the 3 coastal-class vessels which run between the Lower Mainland and Vancouver Island. It says all 3 ships will have their rotors redone by the summer. If you rent and the amount you pay has gone up, you are certainly not alone. New data from CMHC paints a picture of a market that is strained. It's a coast-to-coast issue, but nowhere are prices higher than here in Vancouver and in BC. Justin McElroy breaks down the data and whether there are any solutions in sight.
The rents, they're high. Here is a chart. This is the annual report by the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation. It's considered the gold standard for rental data, with tons of details that only come out once a year. And as you can see, Vancouver is at the top once again. And you might think, hey, $2,200 actually seems low, but that's because this is the measurement of all rental units, including those that have had the same tenant for years and years and years. On the open market, these are the numbers. Metro Vancouver is still number 1, and a newly rented 2-bedroom unit is $2,600, hundreds more than anywhere else in the country. Plus, Victoria and Kelowna are the 3rd and 4th most expensive places in Canada. But is there a silver lining when it comes to vacancy? No. Here is another chart. Vancouver is still under 1%, lowest in Canada. And the number of people moving out of their rentals is also lowest in the country. And a government analyst believes it's because homeownership seems increasingly out of reach.
This normal flow of people from rental to ownership is also sort of slowed up, and that's putting added pressure on the rental system.
So why aren't things getting better, despite the big surge in building rental apartments all across the province? Well, supply has risen, but so too has demand.
there was a really strong population growth in 2023, and you see in Vancouver, for example, that's kept everything really, really tight.
And the numbers bear that out. Here is one final chart. It shows the population growth in BC every quarter over the past decade. And last year, we saw numbers skyrocket to modern highs. All those new people have to live somewhere, and it's one of the reasons why governments are talking more and more about limiting temporary residence. But it also means there's likely no relief on the horizon anytime soon.
The rent and inflation pressures, they are starting to ease. And it'll take a couple of years before we see that work its way through the rental system and stabilize.
Until that happens, though, the living conditions for plenty of British Columbians will be anything but stable. Justin McElroy, CBC News, Vancouver.
A BC goalie left motionless on the ice after a fight, and 5 former Canadian World Junior players charged with sexual assault. We're going to look into the calls for change in hockey culture after the break. Thanks to everyone for watching our commercial-free live stream tonight. A new book by a Filipino-American is diving deep into Filipino migration and the Indigenous struggle against colonialism. Adrian De Leon, SFU's Farley Distinguished Visiting Scholar in History, joined Gloria Makarenko on the early edition to discuss his new book, Bundok, A Hinterland History of Filipino America.
One of the things that attracted me to come up here was this interest in people who really wanted to think about Asian migration in a global perspective, places like the Middle East, places like other places around Asia. For example, Filipino migration to Singapore, to Japan, to Korea, to Taiwan, to China, but also think really critically about people on the move and people who are on the move often against their will, thinking about, for example, refugee migration and refugee histories, or the histories of people mobilized by global plantations in the case of my new book.
Well, and let's talk about your latest book, because this is the second in a triptych of works, right, about the Filipino diaspora. So what are you hoping to share in these books? My
community broadly is often really visible in places like healthcare, places like the petroleum industry, and before that in the early and mid-20th century in places like agriculture. So big Filipino community in places like California, Washington State, Alaska, and Hawaii. And I want us to think about the longer histories of not just why we came to this side of the world, but number two, why we often follow extractive industries. Things like big farms, big plantations, and we often follow the industries that sustain populations in the global north and in settler contexts like Canada. And I wanted to think about that in terms of the other side of the question, which is, why did we leave? And what are the longer histories behind why Filipino migration began in the first place, in which we came to see a place that we call home as increasingly uninhabitable? And for me, the answer is this long history of the plantation. And we often think about the history of the plantation as something that's exclusive to the Americas, exclusive to the Caribbean, for example. But it also affected the Philippines, and it affected the Philippines in ways that are actually really similar to other sort of archipelagic and island contexts like Jamaica and Haiti.
What led you to this field of study?
It was my grandmother. And one of the things I want to say about my grandmother is that, and I think a lot of Filipino grandmothers, is that they're often most interesting in their native languages. And so one of the things I realized growing up was I actually didn't speak my grandmother's native language, and it's not Tagalog. It's a language in the north called Ilocano, which is a lingua franca of people from the Ilocos Coast, the boondocks, right? And that's where the English word comes from, the hinterlands, the mountains of northern Luzon. She spoke Ilocano privately to herself and to my mother, her daughter. And once I learned that, I realized that she had this whole life world really to teach us about longer histories of the province, which she often speaks so fondly of. And I wanted to think, okay, what does global history look like from her eyes?
Yesterday, we told you about 2 disturbing hockey stories.
It is fight night at the fish tank. And you see a couple of punches.
A Pacific Junior Hockey League goalie was forced to leave a game last week after a brawl with the opposing team left him lying motionless on the ice. Meanwhile, 5 former Canadian World Junior Hockey players from 2018 are now charged with sexual assault. These stories have reignited calls to change the culture of hockey. Alexis Peters is a sociology professor at Mount Royal University, specializing in hockey violence and sexual assault. She joins us from Calgary. First, thank you for being here. What do you make of the sexual assault charges and the goalie's severe injury?
Well, thank you, Dan. With the sexual assault situation, when it broke in 2022, I have to admit I was not surprised because I had been studying that for quite a few years, but had met a lot of resistance. I did the first PhD in Canada on issues regarding athletes' attitudes towards male-female relationships, and it was the empirical evidence was disconcerting. With regards to the horrible incident with the goalie the other night, again, I'm disturbed, but again, I'm not surprised. With the culture that goes on that often encourages this type of behavior from such a young age. But it is a little more complicated in the situation, I think, from what I could see on the video, which wasn't that clear. But the violence doesn't surprise me at all. They need to change the culture.
We're having just a slight connection issue, but we're going to keep going with you. Can I ask what resistance? It's okay. We're doing okay. What resistance specifically did you run into as you looked into the sexual assault allegations?
Well, when I did the first PhD, evidence was coming out in the States already regarding group sexual assault among athletes on college campuses. And it wasn't just hockey players, there was a number of things, and it had been studied. But I had also lived the East Coast hockey life, and I had seen some things that very much disturbed me regarding health and well-being of a lot of the players. So you add that, I came back, I went to study the subculture of hockey, and in the meantime, a number of swimmers had come out with some issues. Laura Robinson's book had come out, excuse me, Crossing the Line. And then, of course, unfortunately, the Sheldon Kennedy Graham James thing came out. So people were more interested, especially from the junior, the OHA Junior A, because a lot of anecdotal accounts were coming out that there were some concerns with regards to hazing, initiation, and group sexual assault among the OHA Junior A at the time. So it's interesting, when I went to try to do the empirical study after I created the model, I went to both the OHL to ask them if they would give me access, and I went to the OHA. And the OHL refused me access to do the study, and the OHA did allow me, and kudos to them. So I did go in, and when I did the empirical study, it showed that the OHA Junior A hockey players scored higher on what we call the hypermasculinity scale, which is measured as, Dan, danger is exciting, violence is manly, and were calloused attitudes towards sex that had been used in many other research. So I didn't make up the questionnaires. They were very valid and reliable. They also scored lower on emotional empathy, which was a very disturbing finding, compared to a control group of young men the same age who had not played hockey. So what was going on there? Now, when I came up with the results, they also scored higher on acceptance of interpersonal violence as a way to solve their personal problems.
Alexis
so
Peters, my apologies. We are having a bit of a technical issue. We really appreciate your expertise and what you were able to share with us. Thank you very much. Alexis Peters, sociology professor at Mount Royal University. Thank you for joining us. Ottawa is promising to help police as they tackle a surge of vehicle thefts. As one man tells us, his truck was stolen 2 times, even with a tracker installed. You'll want to hear this.
This beach is familiar turf for Rodney Wood. He grew up across the road and spent many summers here at McWilliams Cove in West Cape.
We didn't even know it was a burial site, until they first showed up. According to my father, he said it was around 1950.
Wood's talking about the bones that his father Colston found and then reburied. But the pounding surf caused even more erosion. The bones surfaced again, and their story was told in these newspaper clippings from 3 decades ago. Rodney Wood's son Joey found the bones that time. This weekend, it happened yet again. More human remains peeking out from the red cliffs.
I know my dad, he reburied them at least 3 times. As ones appeared. I have no idea how many there was at the originally, but this could be a large burial site. We don't know.
The Chief Coroner's Office and the RCMP are investigating. Officials with the Coroner's Office say there is still a significant amount of work to do to determine who the remains may belong to. But people in the area think they're victims of a shipwreck from the early 1800s. Then this. While our cameras were rolling, Wood finds what looks like another bone located along the cliff. He reports the latest find to police. The bones were found behind Paul Wood's home.
I just think there's probably still more bones to reveal yet as erosion occurs. I'm sure there'll be more bodies discovered, I guess.
Rodney Wood says his dad put up a 6-foot wooden cross on the site to mark the unknown graves. But much like the coast itself, it fell victim to the winds and waves. He'd like to see a more permanent memorial on the site.
It was just the right thing to do, these, people were uncovered and they needed to be reburied, and you couldn't just let them go, down the face of the Cape and, be lost forever, I guess you could say.
People who live in this area say they wouldn't be surprised if they find more human remains along this beach as coastal erosion continues to eat away at our coastlines. The police and the provincial coroner's office continue to investigate this latest find. Wayne Thibodeau, CBC News, West Cape.
The federal government is promising Ontario more than $120 million to target gun and gang violence. This comes alongside a surge in vehicle thefts, even for those who have a tracker installed. The CBC's Angelina King spoke with a man whose truck was not stolen once, but twice, and he knew exactly where it was.
Press 1. Michael Walker desperately wanted his stolen truck back. What was most frustrating, authorities knew where to find it. Here in this shipping container. But for more than 2 weeks of him calling police and government officials, no one would get it.
I'm not very happy that someone can't get off their hiney and open the container.
He feared it would be the second time his truck would disappear. The 2023 Toyota Tacoma was first stolen from his driveway, soon after it was found via the aftermarket tracker he'd installed. A tag company employee alerted police and took these photos. The truck was about 15 kilometers away, likely cooling off as thieves waited to see if it was being tracked.
The tag officer called me and said, I have your truck. I'm just waiting for police. And I thought, great, this $1,000 investment paid for itself. I'm going to get my truck back.
But he didn't. The tag employee waited for Peel Regional Police for nearly 5 hours. Then
he had to call 911 because he watched the thieves come back and steal the vehicle again.
Thieves stashed the truck in the shipping container. Tag and Peel police told us it's rare for officers not to respond in time. Police saying all calls for service are triaged for their level of priority. In this case, a vehicle located without suspects present or injuries is not a priority response.
Welcome to Canada Border Services agencies.
Walker tried the CBSA, police, and CN, which operates the rail yard. Nothing came of it. Finally, 17 days later, and after inquiries from CBC Toronto, the CBSA opened the container and located the truck. When asked why it took so long, the agency said it doesn't comment on specific cases.
Nationally, it's a crisis. In Ontario, it's an epidemic.
In 2022, stolen vehicle insurance claims in Canada hit a record, $1.2 billion. So some insurance companies are offering incentives to install trackers or issuing surcharges if drivers don't.
You can track them all over the place, but if you don't have the police presence to reel them in, you're wasting money.
He says once he gets his truck back, he'll be installing an immobilizer as yet another level of protection. Angelina King, CBC News, Toronto.
The U.S. government is signaling it is preparing to retaliate against Iran for a drone strike that killed 3 American troops in Jordan. Iran, meanwhile, is threatening to decisively respond to any U.S. attack on the Islamic Republic. During an official event, the head of Iran's Revolutionary Guard said no threat will be left unanswered. He also said the country is not looking for a war, but is not afraid of it. U.S. President Joe Biden says he has already decided how to respond to the drone attack that killed the 3 U.S. service members and wounded 40 others over the weekend, but gave no details. American forces in the region have been engaged in tit-for-tat strikes with pro-Iranian armed groups since the Israel-Hamas war broke out in October. Up next, massive markups are again hitting the shelves of a popular thrift store whose name was Value. Customers say they feel ripped off. Stick around.
People involved in baseball and curling in Summerside say the sports are already popular here, and the news will help them even more. Events like this not only attract some of the top athletes in the country, they give younger athletes a chance to see what it takes to compete at the top level.
This prestigious national championship promises intense competition.
The city announced 5 upcoming national championship events. These will take place over the next 3 years. In baseball, Summerside will host the 2024-21 U Women's Nationals and the Ray Carter Cup 15 U Nationals for both 2025 and 2026. For curling, the 2025 Canadian Under-21 Championships, men's and women's, and the 2025 Canadian Mixed Doubles Championship.
The economic impact's significant from hotel stays and restaurant visits and ticket sales. But the thing that I think is the biggest benefit for me is the layer this adds to continued our sport development legacy in our community.
The work and the commitment that it takes to... Suzanne Bird is a former world junior curling champion from PEI. She says there's nothing like representing your province at home.
Just seeing all the familiar faces, you know, the fan base, all the volunteers, it's like unbelievably second to none. The younger curlers, they're going to be, you know, seeing this in person, and yeah, there'll be lots of idols.
Some of the best young baseball players will be here too. On top of that, there will be scouts and, of course, many aspiring athletes watching from the stands.
Male, female, they see it being played on a national stage and what they play for and how much work goes into them. So when they see it firsthand, seeing is believing type of thing. So once they see it and they have something to work for, it's just about having fun and learning along the way.
The 21U Women's Baseball National Championships is first on the list. That is in August, and the mayor says the city is hoping to host even more sporting events on top of the 5 announced today for the next few years. Shane Desjardins, CBC News, Summerside.
So I know when I really like a song, if within the first 3 seconds, I'm already vibing to it.
Hey, I'm Rohith Joseph. Vibin' is the new show all about discovering great new songs and fresh artists from across BC and beyond.
It's not one person dictating what good music is, it's the community sharing what good music is.
Stream Vibin' on CBC Listen.
To a big trade for the NHL leading Vancouver Canucks. In the past hour, the team has announced they're acquiring winger Elias Lindholm from the Calgary Flames in exchange for Andrei Kuzmenko. Kuzmenko signed a 2-year contract extension with the Canucks in January last year. The Flames will also get prospects Hunter Brustowitz, Yanni Urno, a 2024 first-round draft pick, and a conditional 2024 fourth-round draft pick. Meanwhile, the Canucks are extending general manager Patrick Alvin's contract. Alvin is the first Swedish GM in NHL history and was named the 12th GM for the Canucks in January 2022. Since then, he's re-signed the top 2 performers on this year's roster, JT Miller as well as Brock Besser. He worked for the Pittsburgh Penguins for 16 seasons, where he won 3 Stanley Cups before joining the Canucks. Some people in the Okanagan Valley woke up to a hazy surprise on Wednesday morning. Pink fog. Look at this. The rosy-hued haze appeared around Kelowna, Penticton, and Summerland for several minutes around 7 a.m. before returning to the standard gloomy fog, which has persisted for days and caused several delays at Kelowna International Airport. Darius Madavi joins us with a forecast. First up, explain the pink fog, please.
Yes, of course. The picture's, first of all, stunning. It's really the same phenomenon that happens at sunrise or sunset. So normally we have a beautiful blue sky, we have the yellow sun when it's up during the day, but during sunrise or sunset, the sun sets, it has to pass, and when it's close to the horizon, the sunlight has to pass through more layers of the atmosphere to reach your eye. And because of that, these short wavelengths of blue and purple light get filtered out and scattered around, so we get the blue sky. But as it sinks down towards the horizon, we start to see more and more wavelengths of light get scattered out, leaving just the red reaching your eye for the sun, and we get that beautiful color in the sky. And so when the pink fog was happening, we weren't just seeing the atmosphere scatter that light, we were also seeing the fog itself, the water droplets suspended in the air, also be scattering that light, which means that everything around you looked pink. And it must have been a very depressing return back to reality with that gray, classic Kelowna fog. Now, turning to the temperatures across BC, still very good for fog-forming conditions. So if we're very lucky, maybe we'll see that pink fog again, but it is very rare, so I do doubt it. You can see here the atmospheric rivers that have been bringing us all that rain, also bringing very warm temperatures to much of the prairies and Western Canada because of this high-pressure system sitting on it. Places like Maple Creek in Saskatchewan broke the all-time provincial record in Saskatchewan for January temperature. Vancouver and Abbotsford, as I said earlier, also set January temperature records, but provincial record is quite something, and only a degree off of the all-time national record for highest January temperature, which was set in Niagara Falls back in 1950. So definitely some interesting weather conditions across the province, especially when you consider that these conditions are just really a couple weeks after, just over 2 weeks after when we saw this extreme cold snap. So temperatures in parts of BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan have jumped 60 degrees Celsius in a span of just 14 or 15 days. You can see here quite a change in temperature over those few days. And so we're expecting a slow return to seasonal over the next few days, but it will take a while. Now, temperatures, as I said, returning to seasonal. But if we take a look at our freezing levels, going to come down, but then slowly start to come back up a little bit, but should start to generally trend downwards, even though we are hovering a little bit higher than I think a lot of skiers and snowboarders would like. And then in terms of rainfall, here we go. Around Pemberton, a little bit better, a little bit of improvement. Not expecting those river levels to jump up quite as much as they were as that rain slowly starts to taper off, particularly in the valley, but still plenty of accumulation coming over the next 72 hours or so. Lots more rain on the way, but fortunately, we are starting to ease off with that last atmospheric river coming in. In terms of conditions, fairly calm, just a small chance of showers throughout the southern interior, and then on the coast, and here in Vancouver, a fairly consistent but soon-to-be dry forecast.
Okay, Darius, thanks very much.
Thank you.
One of the biggest and most popular for-profit thrift stores is being criticized about its pricing. In the past, customers could rely on getting a discount by shopping at Value Village. But now, as Nisha Patel explains, many are accusing that company of massively marking up used items.
Shoppers like Evan Boyce say Value Village has lost its value.
Just kind of feels like a rip-off, to be honest.
In Toronto, he spotted this used vase for sale for about $9. Then realized it would have cost him only $3 to buy brand new at Dollarama.
Most of what they have was donated, so why is there the need to mark it up so much?
The wild prices are a hot topic on social media. From kids' shoes in British Columbia to books in Manitoba, examples of massive markups are piling up.
Give me a break, Value Village. Give me a break.
Customers have called out other thrift stores too, though many, like Goodwill, are nonprofits. Value Village is a for-profit business owned by an American private equity firm. While all of its inventory comes from secondhand donations, Value Village pays charity partners a flat rate for the goods they collect on the company's behalf.
Thrift proud, Value Village.
This recent backlash could weigh on the brand.
If you're going to a thrift store, we would assume that it's going to be less money. And so when you realize that it's not, it kind of breaks what we know to be true.
There are few rules about how businesses price their products. But experts say customers who feel duped are less likely to return.
We're going to be a lot more cautious next time we buy.
Canadians have been turning to thrift stores more often lately, making an effort to shop sustainably or trying to save money as the cost of living soars. They may need to remember the motto, buyer beware.
If you see something that doesn't look like a good price, it's easy to walk on and find something else new.
Some shoppers say they'll still hunt for a bargain.
They're going to try and maximize, get as much money from you as you can, and it's up to us to keep our money.
And Miss Eleanor, what's your favorite thing that you find there?
I don't know. I like to read books, so I find a lot of good books there.
Value Village says thousands of products come through its stores every week. And if customers think an item has been mispriced, they should bring it up with a manager. Nisha Patel, CBC News, Toronto.
Over the weekend, a popular Robson Street staple suddenly closed after a decades-long run. Up next, we hit the streets to find out how people are feeling about the closure. That's next.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
This is Vancouver Island is the brand new podcast that explores stories of island life. Each week, host Catherine Marlowe looks at the joys and challenges of living on the island. Subscribe on CBC Listen or wherever you get your podcasts. And BC Today is the call-in show where British Columbians make their voices heard. And now you can watch it on television, stream it on CBC Gem, and hear it on CBC Radio 1 and CBC Listen.
After about 20 years on Robson Street, Club Monaco's flagship Vancouver store suddenly closed over the weekend.
Karis Hogg hit the streets to talk to people about how the closure impacts them.
I'm here on Robson Street in downtown Vancouver, asking people about the disappearance of Club Monaco's flagship store off Robson Street.
I bought this scarf piece and a pant for my mom right here, actually. So.
Okay, you bought them right here at this store that is now being vacated by Club Monaco.
Yeah, this one right here. Yeah, because I'm around downtown usually, so it's pretty convenient for me.
Yeah, and so how do you feel about Club Monaco leaving Robson Street?
I didn't really expect that because a lot of stores here are kind of closing down. Like, used to be like a big store by the Athleta over there got closed. The Metrotown one's also been like renovated, so I think they're trying to make that the new location.
Wait, so you were asking me if I shop at Club Monaco. So sometimes I go for like sales. Like I'm a salesperson, so I go and check what they have. Right now I'm pregnant, so there is no way that I'm gonna check out stuff there. They don't have pregnancy stuff.
And so how do you feel about seeing it coming down here? You know, it's being dismantled on Robson Street, like the flagship Vancouver store.
Yeah, so I actually didn't know about this because I live in Montreal and we have a Club Monaco there as well, but it's kind of sad. I'm just noticing that now you're telling me, and yeah, it's sad because I guess there are jobs that are being just like gone, and yeah, it's not fun.
Okay, so Club Monaco. You like Club Monaco as a brand?
I love it. So iconic, so beautiful, like great quality, just, yeah, amazing, love it.
Did you come to this store to buy your Club Monaco stuff?
Yeah, I mean, this one in particular, because it's big, it's almost kind of like the flagship in Vancouver, in Metro Van, and it's like such a beautiful spot too, so yeah, it's really sad.
So yeah, how do you feel about seeing that the letters coming down today?
Well, it's pretty shocking, because I mean, I know a lot of people do online shopping these days, but like there's nothing quite like trying clothes on in person. You know, like you can order something offline, like online, but it might not fit, and just like being in person and trying stuff on is like, it's so nice to see how things fit. So, you know, I know they have a little Pacific Center store, but it's like a fraction of the size. So it's sad because I like trying stuff on. I mean, I still shop online all the time, but yeah.
Do you own any Club Monaco stuff?
I do. My brother used to work for Club Monaco, and so he got a discount, and he used to buy me clothes for Christmas, but that's as far as I have. Anything else I can't afford.
And so seeing Club Monaco disappear from this store, how does that make you feel?
Not a big loss. I prefer to shop secondhand. It's more sustainable, and I think we're seeing a big movement of sustainable clothing and people seeking clothing that aren't, or that's ethically made. So support your local secondhand stores, Value Village, Salvation Army, those kind of things.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too.
That is a big store. And yes, you feel bad for the people who are likely out of work by that. We've seen this before, though, on Robson Street and elsewhere. Big stores, rent goes really high, and they can't make a go of it. We don't yet know exactly why this store closed, but yeah, it is concerning.
Absolutely. Thanks for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. You can watch this newscast on CBC Gem, our free app, as well as on YouTube and our website, cbc.ca/BC.
And we will have your next local news at 11 o'clock, right after the National. See you then.